You know what's crazy? I was born in Burkina Faso. I live here, I study here. But somehow visiting Togo, a country I could drive to in a few hours, requires more paperwork than it takes for a French tourist to fly in from Paris. And don't even get me started on the CFA franc. It's our currency. But guess who controls it? Not us. So yeah, when I watched President Traoré get up on that stage last week and say, "One Africa, one government, one passport, one currency," the first thing I felt was, wait, is he serious? And the second? Please, don't let this just be another speech. Because we've heard it before, right? Unity, liberation, Pan-Africanism. Big words on small stages. But this didn't feel like that. This was different. This was our own president, standing with soldiers beside him saying, "We start now." And man, you could feel it in the air. Even before the hashtags exploded. Even before social media lost its mind. Right here in Ouaga, people were whispering in taxis, shouting in markets, watching the clip on old phones. You didn't even need to understand all the words. You just knew something had shifted. I wasn't just proud. I was nervous. Because when someone speaks that boldly, there's always a price coming. But maybe that's the point. Maybe it's time we stop fearing the cost and start asking if it's worth paying. The day after the speech, it was chaos. But not the kind with protests or tear gas. The quiet kind. The kind that fills the air when something real just got said. I remember walking through the market that morning. The aunties selling mangoes weren't arguing about prices. They were arguing about politics. One lady said, "Finally, a leader with guts." Another replied, "Guts are good, but where's the plan?" That's how you knew this was different. It wasn't just excitement. It was a million questions colliding in real time. Then came the online storm. My feed? Flooded. United States of Africa, not Afro money. Traoré challenge. Yeah, people actually started using that tag. There were memes, voice notes, remixes, live debates. Some folks turned his speech into a freestyle. Others posted emotional videos, tears, joy, raw honesty. Finally, they kept saying, someone's talking like we matter. And for once, it didn't feel like hope was imported. It felt homegrown. But the thing that really got to me wasn't the noise online. It was the silence offline. The kind that came from presidents, ministers, diplomats, the ones who usually can't go 5 minutes without a press release. Suddenly quiet. No statements. No endorsements. No, "we stand with our brother, Traoré." Nothing. Back in 2020, when France pulled out of Mali, there were joint statements overnight. But now, when a leader calls for full continental unity, dead air. So ask yourself, are they confused or just calculating? Because maybe they're not staying quiet by accident. Maybe they're staying quiet because they know what this means. And I get it. If you're a president sitting on foreign aid tied to old military deals, a speech like this? It shakes your seat. But what about the rest of us? The young, the broke, the tired? We don't have offshore accounts to protect. We just want something to believe in. And for the first time in a long time, we heard someone say what we couldn't. Here's the part that really hits different. One government for Africa. It sounds poetic, right? But once the buzz dies down, you sit with that idea long enough, and it starts to sound like a direct challenge. Because the question no one wants to say out loud is, if we have one government, who's giving up their seat? Right now, we've got 54 presidents, 54 flags, 54 power centers. Some are democratically elected, some not so much. And many of them? They're backed, funded, by international allies. France, the US, China, the UAE, Russia. So when President Traoré says, "Let's erase national borders and govern together," He's not just proposing a vision. He's pushing a reset button that could shut down dozens of private empires. A lot of these leaders didn't build their power on unity. They built it on division, ethnic lines, religious factions, controlling who crosses which border, milking old rivalries to justify big armies and bloated budgets. So imagine telling those leaders, "Hey, let's share control now." You already know how that conversation ends. In 1963, during the formation of the OAU, now the AU, Kwame Nkrumah pushed for a federal Africa. One military, one economy, one foreign policy. Who shot it down? Most other African heads of state. Why? Because they were newly independent and afraid of losing what little power they had. Now, fast forward to 25, Traoré's offering that same proposal, but with less patience and a lot more fire. And again, silence. History repeats itself. Let's be real. What happens if Traoré's plan actually gains momentum? Does the AU step up and support it? Or do some of its members quietly try to sabotage it behind closed doors? Would your own government ever vote to dissolve itself for the greater good? Because that's what this comes down to. Talk is easy. Surrendering power? That's war. Tell me, would your president do it? Would you? And here's where I start feeling the weight of it all. If this government ever became real, would it be democratic? Would it rotate power? Would it protect small countries or drown them? Would someone from Burkina Faso, my country, ever get to lead it? Or would the same old hierarchies creep back in under a shiny new flag? That's the fear, that we might trade one broken system for another. But here's the hope. Maybe we don't need perfect answers yet. Maybe we just need to start asking better questions. Let me tell you what money feels like in Burkina Faso right now. You wake up, and the price of onions has jumped. You go to the market, and last week's bills don't stretch far enough. You get paid in CFA francs, but the real power? It's sitting in the French treasury. We literally use a currency, CFA, that's pegged to the euro, controlled in Paris. It's been like that since 1945. And guess what? We still call it ours. So when President Traoré says, "We need our own money, Afro money," I didn't roll my eyes. I nodded. Because I'm tired of using a currency that doesn't serve me. Tired of watching the West set the value of what I earn. Tired of small businesses choking on exchange rates. Tired of traders needing euros to buy goods from across the border. It's 25, and we still can't trade with each other like equals. That's insane, but I also know this. Printing a new currency is the easy part. What about trust? What about stability? What about economic muscle? The Eurozone took 40 years of negotiation to align 19 countries. They had strong institutions, central banks, shared credit policies, and they still nearly fell apart during the Greek debt crisis. Now imagine Africa, with all its inequality, coups, oil dependencies, debt loads, trying to do the same. Nigeria's GDP is over 400 billion. Burundi's is under 4 billion. How do you write one monetary policy for both? Would Afro money actually lift us all up, or just tie the weak to the strong and hope it doesn't snap? Is this freedom, or just a different kind of dependency, this time internal? Be honest. I want to hear your take. We can't build a future if we can't talk about the risk, but here's what keeps me hoping. People are already imagining it. Mock-ups of Afro money notes with Sankara's face, designs of coins with Pan-African maps, not from governments, from us, artists, coders, students. That means something, because even if the banks aren't ready, our minds are starting to move. And once people start imagining money that reflects them, you can't keep them comfortable with money that doesn't. Let me tell you a story. 2 years ago, I tried applying for a visa to study in Senegal. Not Germany, Not Canada. Senegal. Just a short flight away. You know what they asked for? Bank statements, medicals, letters, interviews. It cost more to apply for the visa than to buy the plane ticket. And in the end, rejected. No reason, just no. I remember walking home that day thinking, how can I be a foreigner in my own continent? So when I heard Traoré talk about one African passport, I didn't need him to explain it. I've lived the problem, I've felt the rejection. I've watched friends in Europe fly across 5 countries in a weekend, while I can't cross one border without someone asking me, why are you here? In 2024, Africans could travel visa-free to only 13% of other African countries. Meanwhile, a German passport gives access to over 170 countries, many of them in Africa. Do the math, and ask yourself, how did we let this become normal? But I get it. Free movement sounds great, until you start thinking about security. Terror groups don't need passports. Smugglers, traffickers, militants, open borders make it easier for them too. And countries like Nigeria, Mali, Somalia, they've all had waves of instability that spill across lines. You think Kenya wants to import Burkina Faso's problems? Fair. So what's the answer? Do we keep building walls? Or do we build systems that can handle movement with safety? Would you trade some risk for more dignity? Because for many of us, this isn't about tourism. It's about the right to move, to study, to work, to live without begging. So tell me, how would a Pan-African passport change your life? Drop a comment. Let's open this up. And here's the thing nobody says out loud. When you're denied a visa by another African country, you start to wonder, are we even a we? And maybe, just maybe, a single passport isn't just about travel. It's about identity. It's about saying, I'm not just Burkinabe, I'm African. And I deserve to move like it. You know what I found weird? After Traoré's speech went viral, after the hashtags, after the memes, after the debates on TikTok, most African leaders said, absolutely nothing. Not a tweet, not a press release, not even one of those vague, we acknowledge the discourse type of statements. Just silence. And look, silence isn't neutral. It's a strategy. People say, maybe they're just waiting to see what happens. But let's be real. They're not waiting. They're calculating. Because if this unity thing actually moves forward, a lot of people lose power. You think leaders who built entire dynasties off national control are going to smile while someone suggests melting all that down into one pot? Nah, they're not confused. They're worried. Just look back. In 2023, Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger cut ties with France and expelled its military presence. In 2024, they formed the Alliance of Sahel States, AES, a military and political bloc. In early 2025, Traoré floated the United States of Africa, and not as theory, but as policy direction. That's not noise, that's movement. And you know who notices? Washington, Paris, London, Beijing. There's a reason Gaddafi got bombed not long after proposing an African gold-backed currency. There's a reason Sankara was assassinated months after pushing for Pan-African economic autonomy. There's a reason African leaders who push too hard for independence don't tend to live long. That's not conspiracy. That's history. So what happens if this unity movement grows? Will the AU support it or smother it? Will Western powers step back or interfere like always? And if they do interfere, will we even know? Or will it just look like destabilization, terror threats, regime change? Real talk. How much of Africa's chaos is self-inflicted and how much is engineered? I'm not making claims, I'm asking questions. So now I'm asking you, what do you think? Comment if you dare. But here's what gives me hope. This time, it's not just one president talking, it's young people reposting, arguing, laughing, defending, dreaming. And you can jail a person, you can bomb a building. But you can't kill an idea once it spreads. And right now, that idea is moving. There's something deeply wrong with the African map, and I didn't fully see it until I zoomed out. I looked at the borders, and they looked too perfect, too straight, too clean, almost like someone drew them with a ruler. You know why? Because someone did. In 1884, during the Berlin Conference, European powers carved up Africa like a cake, without a single African at the table. Tribes were split, cultures were mashed together, trade routes were cut in half, whole kingdoms disappeared. And those lines, they became borders. And now we fight for them like they were sacred. Think about it. We've gone to war, real war, over borders we didn't draw. We defend these lines because we were born into them. But what if they were never meant to protect us? What if they were meant to keep us apart? I grew up believing I was Burkinabe. And I am. But I also know that my grandparents used to walk across what's now the Ghana border to trade, visit family, celebrate festivals. No passport, no checkpoints. They didn't need permission to be whole. They just were. Then one day, a new map came along, and suddenly you needed papers to see your own people. Europe had to survive 2 world wars to realize that maybe open borders were worth trying. So why are we still defending lines that were drawn before cars were invented? Would you rather live in a continent where you need 6 visas to see your cousins? Or one where movement is a right, not a favor? That's not a rhetorical question. That's your question. Answer it. Because every time I hear someone say, "We can't erase borders, it's too complicated," I think, you erased us once. Maybe it's time we erased your lines. And maybe, just maybe, when we do, we'll finally start to heal. Not from war, not from poverty, but from the idea that we're strangers to each other. Because that was the real violence. And it's still happening, quietly. On paper. At airports. In embassies. In the silence between brothers who now speak with passports instead of trust. I'm not a politician, I'm not an economist, I'm just a young person in Burkina Faso trying to figure out what future I'm walking into. And for the first time in my life, someone in power stood on a stage and said, "Maybe we don't have to keep living inside their map. I don't know if Traoré's vision will work. Maybe it's too fast. Maybe it's too bold. Maybe the world won't let it happen." But you know what scares me more than that? The idea that we won't even try. That we'll hear something powerful, feel something shift, and then scroll past it, like it was just another viral moment. The people who divided us were sure of what they were doing, but somehow we're the ones too scared to try something new. They built walls with guns, and now we're scared to build bridges. With words? Nah, that's not it. I'm not here to convince you. I'm here to ask, do you want your kids to grow up needing permission to visit their own continent? Do you want to keep defending lines drawn by people who saw you as property? Or do you want to be part of the generation that said, "Enough, we'll draw our own"? You've heard the vision, you've felt the fear, you've seen the cracks. Now look in the mirror and ask yourself what kind of future you're going to protect. Because here's the quiet truth nobody wants to say. They can kill a leader. They can crash a currency. They can sabotage a union. But they can't kill a conversation. They can't stop a question once it starts echoing in too many minds. And that question is here now. What if Africa finally chose itself? So choose. Not just with likes, with thought, with voice, with courage. Because if we don't, then we've already chosen the past.